I also want to welcome everybody who's watching online or listening to the podcast. It's great to have you join us digitally as well. Before we get into the message for today, I want to talk about what we're doing next week, next Sunday, and next Tuesday. We're doing something called You Asked For It. And if you don't know what this is, it's basically an opportunity for you to ask any questions, and then myself and our founding pastor, Kevin, will just be giving you answers on the spot. During service, they can be questions about God, Jesus, the Bible, faith, theology, anything about that. You can ask questions about our church and our strategy, and if you wonder why we do the things we do, you can ask a certain level of personal questions to me and Kevin. We're not going to tell you everything, obviously, but if you want to know stuff about us, we'll do that. If you just want our opinions on why Chris Stapleton is an objectively better musician than Bob Dylan, I'll be happy to answer that one. He's not even here to hear about that, but it's just a fun service. It's a good time. We're going to give you kind of our answers from the Bible where applicable, and just our opinions on others where applicable for that as well. But we'd like to kind of get as many questions ahead of time so that if there's 5 or 6 we can group together, we can answer as many questions as we possibly can during the service. And so you can submit questions right now by visiting our online hub at accesschurch.info. There is a link at the bottom of the page that will take you to a Google form that is totally anonymous. So if you've got, some question you don't want to be attached to your name, that would be a great way to do it. Otherwise, you can text us at our church texting number, 651-800-7901. And if you know somebody in your life, maybe it's a coworker or a neighbor, even a family member who's asked you questions about Christianity before, maybe you don't know how to answer them, I would encourage you to forward them here. Let them ask their questions. And even next week, I think it'd be an awesome week to invite somebody to join you for a service, either Sunday or Tuesday. And if you can't think of a question right now and one hits you next week, we will also be answering questions live that you can text in to that number. And so we've done this a few times before. The last time was before COVID, but every time we do it, I just love it. It's fun. It's kind of a unique experience together. And so this is your official invitation back for You Asked For. And if you want to get some questions off your mind right now, that's where to do it. Okay, so that's that. Today, though, we are wrapping up a series we've been on called Enemies of the Heart. And over the last 6 weeks, what we've been doing is taking a look at some of the more common ways in which our enemy, the devil, tries to steal our hearts away from this incredible relationship with God that we can have when we put our trust in Jesus. And every single week, we've been reading this verse from one of John's letters. In fact, if you've been here for any of the past weeks, maybe you've even subconsciously memorized this verse. Maybe it's the first Bible verse you've ever memorized in your life, gold star if so. But this is what we've been reading. He says, "Dear children, keep away from anything that might take God's place in your hearts." And I don't want to rehash the whole series and why this is so important, but basically the more God is the prominent thing that occupies our hearts, the more we win, the better off we are. When we put our trust in Jesus and grow in this relationship with our Heavenly Father, we can experience more peace, more love, more joy, more security. Jesus said he came for one reason, to restore us into a relationship with God. He said that he was going to be the bread of life and living water, and that those inner needs we have can be satisfied the more God has our hearts. But when we allow anything else, even if they seem like good things, if anything else occupies God's place in our hearts, well, then we lose. And there's nothing the enemy wants more than for us to lose. There's nothing he wants more than for us to miss out on what a relationship with God can bring to us. And so again, we've been talking about all the different ways in which the enemy tries to confuse and lie and cause doubt and manipulate us into not growing in our relationship with God, but doing anything else in place of that. So if you've missed any of the weeks, if you're here for the first time, it's the end of the series, but you can go catch them all online or listen to the podcast, subscribe, do all that sort of thing. Now, a couple weeks ago, when we talked about busyness, I said that I think busyness is one of the most common strategies that the enemy uses in our culture today. I mean, we are all so busy running as fast as we possibly can. It's one of the more common things, but it's what we're going to talk about today that I think is the most destructive strategy the enemy uses. And it's this: pride. Now, when we think of pride as a culture, I think we kind of all have a similar definition in mind of like this, stick your chest out, I'm better than you sort of person. And that's not the pride that I'm talking about here. And I'm not sure even all types of pride are necessarily that bad. I think it's okay to be proud in something that we accomplish. I think it's okay to be proud as long as it doesn't get too far in, overcoming a challenge. I don't think there's a problem in being proud of our kids, none of that sort of stuff. The pride that the enemy uses against us to attack our hearts is so much more subtle. It's so hidden and almost beneath the surface. But the enemy will use our pride to get us to think this: I don't desperately need God. If the enemy can get us to think this, he can hurt us more than almost anything else. About a year ago, I was working on one of my vehicles, a Ford Expedition, and there were some engine problems, and I am by no means a mechanic at all, okay? That's not my gifting, but I am by a lot of means very cheap, and so I will try just about anything if it means I can save a couple bucks in the process. And so my engine was misfiring, and I don't know enough about what that means. All I know is when your engine misfires, you got to replace the coil packs and the spark plugs. And so I go to O'Reilly's and I buy all the stuff that I need, and there's 8 of them. It's a V8 engine, and I get some other tools, and I just decide one Saturday I'm gonna work on this thing. I am going to fix my truck because I'm capable. I can do this myself, and so I got to take off this engine cover and move hoses and disconnect wires, but I'm getting somewhere, and I go through and I replace 7 out of the 8, packs and plugs and whatever sort of thing. And if you are a mechanic, I've heard that's like a small miracle on a 5.4 liter Triton engine. Someone can confirm that with me later or not, but anyway, I go through and everything's working great, and we get to the last one. And sure enough, it's on one of the cylinders that's misfiring, and I just cannot get this stinking little bolt off. It's, I don't know, a little 8 millimeter, 7 millimeter bolt, and no matter what I do, it will not come loose. And so I think, I'll get a bigger ratchet so I can get some more torque on there. Nope. I'll put an extension on the socket so I can attack it from a different angle. And of course, it's 800 feet deep into the car, and you're like trying to balance on one foot, and I can't get it off, and I think, well, maybe I'll hammer the socket on so it really grips that bolt good. And nope, that doesn't work either. I spend an entire life savings on WD-40 and brake parts cleaner. That doesn't work. I try to use pliers. I try to use vice grips. I cannot get this stinking bolt out. And I was spending hours on this thing. But the first ones took me 45 minutes to do all 7. I've now spent, 2 or 3 hours on this one. And finally, I give up for the day. I just leave the truck there, come back out the next day, work at it again, do all the same things. And I just can't get this bolt out. And by now, I've said so many mechanic words, and I've thrown so many wrenches, and I'm so frustrated and angry inside. And I have completely rounded off this bolt, okay? I have got myself in a royal pickle. And so I do what no man wants to do when he's trying to fix something. I have to admit defeat and phone a friend. And so I call up my buddy Tim. Tim's the guy I call anytime I have any sort of vehicle issues. And, he drives 45 minutes one way to get to my house to help me with this one bolt. And in 10 minutes, the stupid thing is out. Like, whatever. But everybody needs a Tim in your life, okay? Tim is wonderful. But here's the thing. I did not want to do that. I wanted to handle it myself. I don't need anybody's help. I can manage. I'm not taking it into the mechanic because I'm a man. I could fix my own vehicle, And no, I can't, okay? That's what I came to realize. No, I can't. If fixing that car was totally dependent on me, it would still be parked in my driveway right now. A year later, I was incapable, and it wasn't until I admitted that. I said, I can't do it, and invited somebody who could. It wasn't until then that the problem got fixed. And it's that idea, that attitude right there that the devil doesn't want us to have when we approach God. He wants us to keep believing in ourselves. He wants us to keep telling, you can do it. Don't worry about it. In fact, this is the very first tactic the enemy ever used in the garden with Adam and Eve. Did God say don't eat that fruit? It can't be that big of a deal, right? You don't need to listen to him. Oh, I mean, nothing bad's going to happen. In fact, in Genesis, we read this. He says, "You won't die," the serpent replied to the woman. "God knows that your eyes will be opened as soon as you eat it, and you will be like God, knowing both good and evil." And you don't need God if you can be like God. You don't need God if you can manage life on your own or you think you can. You don't need to listen to God. You don't need to follow God. Don't worry about it. Just do what I'm saying. And sure enough, convinces Adam and Eve to eat the fruit. And we're all familiar with the story. Everything is ruined from there on out. And here's the thing. This tactic of the enemy of tapping into our pride was so stinking effective. He's been using it for thousands of years. Over and over and over again, he keeps using the same tricks on us. And over and over again, we keep falling into it. We keep falling into the trap that the enemy lays. We live in a culture right now that celebrates independence from God. Not being totally dependent, but God, we want nothing to do with you. We can manage life on our own. As a nation, we've dedicated the month of June to independence from God. It's Pride Month, right? God, we don't need you. God, we can do what we want. Next weekend, there's going to be a big festival and a parade down in the Twin Cities celebrating God, stay away. I don't desperately need you. In fact, I don't even want you. We have as a culture rejected any form of objective morality. We choose to live by my truth and follow our feelings and whatever seems good in the moment. And we could spend 15 years talking about all the ramifications of that and why the world is the way it is because we keep rejecting God, saying, no, I don't need you. But what I want to do today as we wrap up this series is talk to those of us that do believe in God. And in fact, many of us who have probably even put our trust in Jesus. Because when it comes to pride, I think there's something for all of us that we tend to think that's somebody else's problem. We tend to think that's an out there issue and never look within. But here's the question I want us to ponder for the rest of our time together is, do I desperately need God? Or have I fallen victim to the enemy's lies? Whatever's going on in life right now, good, bad, a lot of struggle, things are honky-dory. Whatever your life is like, do we desperately need God? Or are we just fine on our own? There's a parable Jesus told one time that's exactly about this. And this is how he starts off this made-up story, this parable. He says, 2 men went to the temple to pray. One was a Pharisee, and the other was a despised tax collector. Now, those of us today, we don't understand this reference, this dichotomy between the Pharisee and the tax collector. It was as big of a gap as you could possibly get, status-wise, respect-wise. The Pharisee in this story would have represented the very best you could possibly be, and the tax collector would have represented the very worst you could possibly be. And so here you have these two, again, fictional people, but 2 people on opposite ends of every spectrum going to talk to God. And the story continues. The Pharisee stood by himself and prayed this prayer. I thank you, God, that I'm not like those other losers, those people, cheaters, sinners, adulterers. I'm certainly not like that tax collector. I fast twice a week and give you 1/10 of my income. I don't know about you, but when I read this, I don't even hear a prayer in here. I just basically see somebody applying for a new job. Like, here's my resume, sort of thing. But I wonder if we could be honest enough to ask, is this the impression we give to God? When we go to God, is this kind of the same feel that we end up portraying? Now, maybe our resume doesn't look the same as this Pharisee, but come on, don't. Sometimes we kind of do the same things. Do I really need God? Well, I never murdered anybody. I've never robbed a bank. I pay my taxes, or at least the ones that H&R Block tells me to pay, so I think I'm pretty good. Do I really need God? I'm not sure. There's probably many of us, we don't do some of the more common, cultural outward sorts of sins. I don't have a drinking problem. I've never cheated on my spouse. I've never abused anybody. Do I desperately need you? I don't know. I think I'm doing pretty good. Even like the Pharisees, sometimes we like to kind of boast in our own accomplishments. I mean, after all, I'm sitting in a church service, or I'm listening to a Christian podcast. It's got to count for something, right? Every once in a while, I crack open the Bible and try to read it for 37 seconds, Some of us, we say, or we kind of have this attitude with God, well, I volunteer. That's pretty good, right? Some of us, it's, well, hey, you know what? After I've paid all my bills, and after I've gotten my new cars, and after I've upgraded my four-wheelers, and after I've taken all my vacations, if there's any money left, I'll give you some of it, God. And we start to think, I'm pretty good. Here's the thing that happens slowly over time is our desperation for God is diminished because we've allowed our pride to fill God's place in our hearts. I wonder if there's some of us, if we were really honest, if we would be brave enough to say, God is nice, and I'm not really sure he's necessary. God's nice to have around, but I kind of manage life pretty well. It's almost like car insurance, We want it if there's an accident, but the rest of the time it's just a piece of paper that sits in the glove box, We like God. We like feeling loved and all the warm, fuzzy feelings that come with that. There's many of us, we probably like God's principles and instructions for life. It certainly makes life easier when we do kind of the right things, but many of us don't have a desperate longing for God himself. He's just sitting in the glove. We'll come and do the church thing for an hour, a couple times a month, and then we'll put God back in the glove box and get on with our lives. Thank you, God, that I'm not like those other people. Thank you, God, I can do it on my own. I wonder how similar to the Pharisee we can be sometimes, myself included. But this isn't where the parable ends, because he goes on, he says, but the tax collector stood at a distance and dared not even lift his eyes to heaven as he prayed. Instead, he beat his chest in sorrow, saying, "Oh God, be merciful to me, for I am a sinner." Here's somebody who is acutely aware of their desperate need of God. God, I can't do it on my own. I need you. And then Jesus gives us the lesson of the parable. He says, I tell you, this sinner, this tax collector, not the Pharisee, returned home justified before God. For those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. When we read this today in our culture, in our time, this doesn't even hit with us like it would have in the first century. In order to understand this, it would be like if Jesus told us this parable today, he would equate us with the Pharisee and Hitler with the tax collector. And say if Hitler prayed that tax collector prayer, he would go home more right with God than we would. That is how crazy offensive this was for Jesus to say. But here's the point he's trying to get across is that all of us, the Pharisee and the tax collector, you and I and everybody in between, we all desperately need God. Christianity is not about us, just kind of doing life as well as we can and managing on our own and then going to God when we need a little boost when something bad happens. That's not Christianity. Christianity is about recognizing there's something bad in me. There is my fallenness. There is my sin nature. There's my inability to do life the right way. My inability to be more like Jesus. And we need help. Christianity is not a system designed for temporary relief, but for total rescue. Because that's what we need. We need to be rescued from ourselves. Jesus said in his Sermon on the Mount, he said, God blesses those who are poor, not financially poor, that has nothing to do with it, but poor in spirit, poor on the inside, and realize their need for him. For the kingdom of heaven is theirs. It's like step one in any recovery program. In order to fix the problem, we have to admit there's a problem. In order for God to be more in our hearts, we need to admit, God, I need you to be more in my heart. How does the kingdom of heaven become more a part of us? By saying, God, I can't do it on my own. I desperately need you. And here's the thing. The enemy is so smart. He is so cunning. He wants to keep us convinced I can do life on my own. But the reality is we are all completely helpless. We can look pretty good on the outside. We can manage pretty well as long as life is going well. But at the core of who we are helpless without God. If you and I, if we want to be right with God and go to heaven when we die, then we desperately need to rely on God's grace that we can have by putting our trust in Jesus. That's the only way. There is no other way. We cannot be right with God and go to heaven apart from that. We desperately need him. But I think what happens for so many of us that would call ourselves Christians is, we make that decision, but that's where the desperation stops. Oh, good, I got my ticket into heaven. Now I can manage the rest of life alone. No. We ought to be just as reliant on God the moment we realize we need a Savior and every moment of life thereafter. If you and I, if you're married, if you want to be a better spouse, you know what we need more than anything else? We desperately need God to help us fulfill our specific marriage role. We desperately need him to reveal that to us and then empower us, change us on the inside, fill our hearts so that we can be the husband or wife that we've called to be. We need God. If you're a parent, especially if you have kids still in the home, if you want to be a better parent, you know what we need more than anything else? We don't need another 5 Steps to Successful Parenting podcast or, one more book to read or one more class. I mean, all those things are maybe fine, but you know what we need more than anything else? We desperately need God to give us the courage and the determination it's going to take to raise our kids with godly values in a world that's going to do everything it can to suck them out. We need God's help to be that kind of parent. If you want to be a better friend, better neighbor, better coworker, whatever it might be, we desperately, we have to understand, we desperately need God to fill our hearts with his compassion. Because otherwise our natural tendency is to be selfish. Our natural tendency is, I'll be a good friend when you do good things for me, but the second you don't perform or the second you do something I don't like, well, then I'm gonna withdraw. That's not being a good friend. We have to have God fill us on the inside. It's a need that we can't do life well without. If you struggle with anger, like I do, counting to 5 is fine and USA is fine, but you know what we need more than anything? If you have an anger issue, what we need desperately is, God, I want you to soften my heart so that I don't get angry to begin with. I don't want to just deal with the symptoms of anger. God, I want you to fix me so that I don't blow up, so that I don't say something I'm going to regret, so that I don't do something that's going to hurt somebody else. God, I am counting on you. I can't do it on my own. If we struggle with greed, the answer to greed is not another dollar. The answer to greed is desperately reaching out to God, saying, God, this money has a grip on me. I need you to loosen it. I can't do it on my own. If we struggle with anxiety and worry, you know this firsthand. What we desperately need is for God to give us peace on the inside. If you struggle with depression, me again, what we desperately need is not just a nice saying from somebody and not just don't worry, it's going to get better, but we need God to reveal to us eternal hope. We need God to remind us that he is with us and there is hope. And this life doesn't last very long. If we struggle with feeling like we don't measure up, we desperately need God to help us see ourselves the way he sees us. If we're hurt or wounded by somebody, we desperately need God to help us forgive. It is unnatural. We cannot truly forgive on our own without God touching our hearts. If we feel like we want to give up, I can't do this, I can't make it through this, I don't even know if I want to make it another day. What we desperately need is God to say, I am with you, and I will give you the strength to get through this. We all need God. Author Dane Ortlund writes this in one of his books. He says, we will not grow, not deeply anyway, our hearts won't grow, except by going through the painful death of being honest about our own spiritual bankruptcy. We cannot, here's the thing, when we allow pride to take root in our hearts, what we do is we put our hands up and we make this barrier and say, God, no more. Now, if our trust is in Jesus to be right with God, then it's not an eternal barrier, okay? We can still go to heaven when we die. But in this life, day to day, the struggles that we go through, when we allow pride in there, we say, God, you stay there. I want you up to here, but no more. And we prevent God from doing at least more of his work in us. But when we put our hands down, when we say, God, I do need you, then as we move closer to God, God moves closer to us. That's what we've been reading every single week of this series, what James, the half-brother of Jesus, writes. But I want to read more of the context of what he says. He says this, and he gives grace, talking about God, generously. As the scriptures say, God opposes the proud. If we say no more, he'll say, okay. But he gives grace to the humble. So humble yourselves before God. Resist the devil, and he will flee from you. Come close to God, and God will come close to you. But he goes on. He says, wash your hands, you sinners. It's pretty tough for us to admit. We'd much rather just brush by that and get on to the next thing in our day and not admit that. But he says, no, let's be aware of this. Wash your hands, you sinners. Purify your hearts. For your loyalty, your heart is divided between God and the world. Let there be tears for what you have done. Let there be sorrow and deep grief. Let there be sadness instead of laughter and gloom instead of joy. Humble yourselves before the Lord. And here's the promise. He will lift you up in honor. We're going to spend a few minutes just listening to a song. It's not meant to be sung along with, but I think maybe for some of us, the words of this song are going to be like a prayer. And here's what I hope we can do for the next couple minutes together is simply sit with God and try to do this. Try to humble ourselves. We don't want to be overwhelmed, but I think sometimes we don't even stop to think about our own inadequacy, our own spiritual bankruptcy. And James says, no, we need to be aware of that. And so for the next couple minutes, we're going to do that. We're just going to sit here and try as best as we can. And maybe you've never done something like this before. Maybe you don't even know what to say or do. Let's just sit and try and focus on God and have our hearts be reminded of how much we desperately need him. Let's give more of our hearts to him.
You can have my heart, you can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me. You can have my heart, you can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me. Oh, your love is like a river, so take me under and wash me clean. And while I'm there, let me remember all the hope you've given me. And you can take my heart, you can take my whole heart, you can have every part of me. You can have my heart, you can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me.
Father, as we just sit here in your presence, help us to see more clearly our desperate need for you. Help us, God. Some of us, we don't even know how to do this. What does it mean to humble ourselves in your presence? God, we want to invite you to help us with that, to lay down our pride and to give you more of our hearts. Give us a better perspective, God, of how much we need you.
You can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me. You can have my heart, you can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me. If I could write you a letter, 1,000 pages I would need. For you alone have loved me better than any love I've ever seen. You can have my heart, you can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me. Yeah, you can have my heart, you can have my whole heart, you can have every part of me.
If there is something in your life that you have just been struggling with for so long, it feels like it's impossible to make any leeway. Maybe it's a relationship where, you know what, they just hurt me so much and I've tried to forgive, but I can't. Maybe like me, it's just something, God, I keep getting so angry. Why No matter what I do, I can't fix this. If there's a worry that you have that it just keeps you up at night, or you find yourself randomly in the middle of the day, man, why am I so anxious? Why do I feel so tense? As best as we can, let's just acknowledge that. Say, God, here's my struggle, and I need you. Whatever that thing is, for a moment, let's just reflect and think and quote unquote, give it to God. I desperately need you in this situation. God, have my heart.
You can have my heart. You can have my whole heart. You can have every part of me. You can have my heart. You can have my whole heart. You can have every part of me.
I want to say this. I wonder if there's some of us, maybe here in the room or online, or you know what the thing we need to do is, we've never put our trust in Jesus before. We don't even have access to a relationship with God because we've never surrendered in our hearts to saying, God, I can't be right on my own. I can't be with you on my own. I don't measure up. And so what I want to do right now is just lead us in a prayer. If that's you, if you don't remember a time that you've ever said, Jesus, you are my Savior, then I want you to just pray with me quietly in your hearts. Father, I admit today, I am not good enough to be with you. I am, like that tax collector prayed, I am a sinner in need of rescue. As much as I try, as much as I want to be, I am totally and completely and utterly helpless to be right with you on my own. And so today, I put my trust in your Son, Jesus. I believe that he is the answer I need. I believe that he took the penalty I deserved, and instead he trades me, gives me his righteousness, so that, Father, now I can be right with you. So that, Father, now I can know you. Now I can experience this relationship with you that you have wanted since the beginning of time. Thank you for such an incredible gift. Jesus, all of my trust is in you. You are the way, the truth, and the life. Thank you for rescuing me. God, I give you my heart.